Hello everyone and welcome to another Fusion 360 Live. My name is Brad Tallis. As you can tell by my background, I'm still traveling right now, working remotely. So I'm in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho right now on my way to Montana. So again, hopefully this live stream goes smoothly with the internet. So today I'm going to be talking about how would you model something like this. Now it doesn't look overly complex, but if we look at it from the front, we can see that, it's got a curved surface on the top and the bottom. It's got, some pockets in here, etc. So how would you go about approaching this to model something like this with this curved surface? And I've noticed I posted this out onto the Facebook forums, and people have already responded how they would go about modeling it. Whoops, my method is not the correct method. It's not the only way of doing it. It's just one way of modeling this. So it'd be really interesting to see how everybody else approaches something like this. We're also thinking about having Angelo take this model and then show how would you machine this. So how would you do these pockets and the curved surfaces and the chamfered edges and all that kind of stuff. So keep an eye out for an upcoming live stream on that. Okay, Angelo is helping me out on this live stream. He's answering the chat questions, so if you have any questions, please feel free to post them out there and he'll try and get those to me. I'm on limited monitors, so I can't really see the chat very well, so I might have to wait near the end to answer some of these questions. So this is the drawing that I created that I'm going to go off of, so I'm going to be referencing this drawing quite a bit. I've also included the outline and the drawing in the description of this YouTube video, so please feel free to download those and follow along to the video later on, or try it yourself once this YouTube video is over. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. And again, this is kind of how I approached it. I'm not saying this is the exact correct way. First thing I'm going to do is change my units into millimeters because we are doing metric for this. And because the part is pretty symmetric, I'm actually only going to draw part of the part. In fact, I'm going to draw basically a quarter of the part and half of the part. And you'll see that as we go along. So I'm going to create my sketch on my top plane because most of the information to me is kind of being displayed in this, this top representation. Okay, so the very first thing in the drawing is it asks for a 30 millimeter radius dimension, and you'll notice by default we do diameter dimensions. So how do I get a radius dimension? Well, all I have to do is click to create the circle. I didn't type in anything. And then I'm going to do a dimension. And I can also use the D key. D for dimension is my shortcut key. So I'll go ahead and select this. And again, you'll notice it's showing me a diameter. But if I right mouse click now, you can see I can change it from a diameter to a radius. And now it's asking for a radius number. We'll type in 30 and we'll hit OK. And I now have a 30 millimeter radius circle. The next thing I want to do is to create a centered rectangle, but it's actually not centered to the origin. In fact, it's kind of hard to see, but you'll see here, so this rectangle is 100 millimeters tall, but you'll notice that it's offset by 55 millimeters here, so it's actually sitting a little bit higher. You'll notice there's more room up here than there is down here. So how do I go about doing that? Well, I'll go ahead and go into my rectangle, center rectangle, and I'm just going to kind of draw it out here in space somewhere. I'm not getting near the origin, but I can type in it's 200 millimeters wide by 100 millimeters tall. Okay? And then I can kind of move this around. You'll notice it's not fully constrained. What I want to do now is line it up with this origin right here. So I'm going to do a horizontal vertical constraint, and I showed this tip last time. You'll notice it's not catching to the midpoint here. it's looking for a point, and there is no point along here. But I want to catch to the midpoint, so I'm going to hold down my Shift key, and now you can see it's catching to that midpoint of this line. So I'm going to click there, and it's now lined up or made the center or the midpoint of this line vertical with my origin. Okay, now I can throw that dimension on here. So I'll say from there to there, we'll make that the 55. And sure enough, you can see it put it in the correct location. The lines turn from blue to black. That means they're fully constrained. And we're going to be kind of focusing on that quite a bit to make sure that we have a fully constrained sketch as we're going through. Okay, what I'm going to start doing now is start to kind of build these arms. And these are kind of interesting. You'll notice they're like 60 degrees like this, but like this is more sloped than this one is over here. This is 50 degrees here, a radius of 15. So I'm going to kind of start building these arms right here. So let's start out with that 15 millimeter radius. So again, I'm just going to kind of start to draw off to the side, and it's asking for a radius, so I'm just going to click somewhere, create my radius dimension, and type in 15. Then I will make sure that that's lined up using constraints, like so. Okay, now I'm going to back up half a second here. You might ask, well, couldn't you just hover over this point right here and you'll see this cyan line kind of appear? And now I know I'm perfectly lined up with that center point and I could create my circle. Well, here's the deal. That was just a snap guide, so it is not constrained at all to that point. That's only a guide. Okay, so that's why I tend to draw things off to the side. Then I come in and I say I want that to be vertical with that center point, that origin point, and now you'll notice the only thing it can do is move up and down. It can't move to the left or to the right. But I can control this using a dimension. So I'll go ahead and place my 60 millimeter dimension. So I'll type in 60, and we can see that sure enough, that turned black, and that is constrained. Now to draw these little, I call them arms or fingers, whatever you want to do, I'm going to just kind of rough them out and then control them with dimensions. So I obviously want to do a tangent line because it's going to kind of come off this circle in this direction. So I'm just going to click and hold. And you'll notice by holding down my left mouse button, it's doing this automatic tangent for me. So I'm just going to click there and maybe something like that. And then I'll do the same thing on this side. I'm going to click and hold. You can see I got the tangent, and I'll just come over here somewhere. So I quickly kind of mocked up what that's going to look like. Then we're going to control it with the dimensions from the drawing. And again, I'm not going to flip back and forth too many times on the drawing, but just know that I'm referencing the drawing to get these measurements and stuff. So let's do a dimension. I'm going to go ahead and control these. We know those need to be 60, so I'm going to type in 60. I'll do the same thing over here. Now I could type in 60, or I can click on an existing dimension and it's going to reference that dimension. And the reason this is handy is because if I came back and said make that 65, that's going to turn to be 65 also. And I don't have to type it in twice or make a mistake, type it in 61 instead of 60 or something like that. Okay, so now we know those triangles are 60 degrees. Then I'm going to go ahead and control, we know that it's 50 degrees between these two guys, so I'll go ahead and place that one and say 50. But you'll notice like this one's leaning a little bit more than this one is over here. This one's a little bit higher than this one is over here. But this is kind of, I think this is the fun part where you kind of see your sketch start to get built and controlled correctly. So what I'm going to do is, this is 50 degrees between these two angled lines. Well, I need to basically create half of this. So if we knew that this was 25, because 25 is half of 50, it would then line these guys up. Well, I need a line to do that. So I'm going to create a line. I'm going to change it to a construction line just by clicking on this little construction icon. And I'm just going to draw that straight down like so. I now have a construction line. And because I started at the origin, you can see it automatically created those coincident constraints for me. So this line is tied. I'm trying to drag it right now and I physically can't. So it's tied to that origin. So check this out. This is actually kind of cool. I'm going to now come in and say, let's put a dimension from this line to this line here. And I'm going to go ahead and place that. Well, I could type in 25, but what if we end up changing this angle? I'd then have to go in and change that angle. So instead, I'm going to reference that 50. So I clicked on the 50, and you can see it put that dimension value in there. Well, I want it to be 50 divided by 2. And notice what happens. Let me kind of move this down a little bit. It now says 25, and you can see that those two blue lines became constrained, and we can see that they look nice and even now. We obviously know this is 25, so that has to be 25. And again, because we're referencing this, if we were to change this to 60, that would have to be 30. So try not to type in the numbers as much as referencing existing ones. That way, if you come in and change them, they'll update accordingly. Hopefully you guys knew about that tip. Okay, let's go ahead. Now I tell you all the time, I like to fillet in 3D, but this is kind of I would say this is kind of a major part of my sketch. So I'm going to go ahead and do the fillet in 2D. So I'll come in and say fillet. I'll click on this point. It's supposed to be 10 millimeters, so it remembered that. And I'm going to go ahead, before I hit enter, I'm going to go ahead and click on this point also. That way it'll do both at the same time. And I'll hit enter. Now you'll notice I can move these around if I need to. I'll leave that one kind of up there a little bit. Now I want to make these lined up. So let's go ahead and control one of these. Again, kind of using the drawing here, I can see that this circle, which happens to be, or this center point happens to be the radius there, is 141 from the top edge. So I'll just throw a dimension from here to that point, and I'll say 141, and we're starting to see all of this is becoming fully constrained. Well, now I want this other finger to be perfectly lined up with that. So let's go ahead and do a horizontal constraint. I want that point to be the same as this point right here. So you can see by using the horizontal constraint, it went ahead and did that. I notice there's a lot of road noise around me. Hopefully that's not coming through on the microphone. Hopefully you guys are able to hear me okay and learn everything. Let me look at the questions really quick. Okay, it doesn't look like we got any questions. So let me continue on here. Okay, so looking at my sketch, there's a lot of my drawing, I should say, there's a lot of stuff going on. And you hear me all the time where I talk about keep your sketches simple. And I highly recommend doing that because the more complex your sketch gets, the more confusing it kind of gets. So I'm actually going to reuse this sketch a couple times, but then you're going to see we're going to say, okay, we're at a good stopping point. Let's create a new sketch, and then finally let's create a third sketch, for example. So I'm going to keep this sketch pretty simple. I'm not going to do any of these pockets or holes or anything like that. All I'm concerned about right now is kind of the main shape. Okay, so we can see that the overall thickness of this object is 24. We can also see that it's pretty symmetric. So I'm actually going to do half of the model. We're only going to create the top half of this model, and then we'll mirror it near the end to move everything to the bottom side. So I'm going to go half of 24, so 12. So we'll finish my sketch. I'll go ahead and select my profiles that I want, extrude, and I'm going to go ahead and say 12 instead of the 24. Also notice I'm extruding up, so my sketch is kind of on this bottom plane. And there's kind of our basic shape. Now, I'm going to continue on here. Let's fillet these edges here. So again, using information from the drawing, I'm just going to fillet these vertical edges. Might rotate so I can see that one a little bit better. 10 millimeters, we're good to go there. And now I want to start working on some of these pockets and stuff like that. Here's my original sketch. I'm going to kind of keep that as my original, almost like my skeleton sketch. And then my next sketch I'm going to do just, for example, the pockets. So I'm going to click on this top face, create a sketch, and then I want to grab the information. So we're going to project. So create, project, project, or as you see me always do, I always use the P key, P for project. But I want to project the whole body. In fact, I mean, it wouldn't matter in this case because there's not much going on. I could do the specified entities, but I'm going to do bodies pretty much the whole time. So I'm going to switch to bodies right now, and it's going to project that whole body onto our sketch, including, for example, the center points of these fillets. And now you kind of know why I did the fillet before I did this sketch. If I had kept these square, I wouldn't have something to reference right there, for example. Okay, so let's do some, again, referencing this drawing here. I'm going to create this radius 40 circle that goes all the way around like so, and we're going to start creating these pockets. Again, going to keep it simple, so we're not going to do these rounded edges until later, but I can see they're 15. Here's a construction line that goes to the corner there, so I'm probably going to do that, and then an 8 millimeter gap there. Okay, so let's kind of build that. So circle, construction circle, because I'm just going to kind of reference this circle. Again, it's a radius, so I'm just going to go ahead and click, dimension this guy, and say radius of 40. And it'll update. And then I'll do my line. I'm still in my construction, so I can go ahead and draw a line to that point there. And I'm going to go ahead and do a vertical line because I'm probably going to end up mirroring some of these pockets. So once I create this, I'm probably going to mirror it over there. In fact, let's go ahead and do another construction line like so. Okay. Let's offset this angled line right here. So remember it was a spacing of 8, so I'm going to type in 4, and it's going to offset 4. I'll repeat that command. I'll go ahead and offset that guy. I'm going to start to drag in that direction, and I can see it's a minus, so I'm going to say minus 4. And now we have those lines there. I'm going to offset this line here, but notice it's trying to do the whole thing. All I care about is the line. So I'm going to turn off chain, start to drag, and say minus 15. Okay. Then I'll go ahead and do the, come on, sorry, let me do that again, offset, -15, enter, must not have hit enter. I'll do the offset here. This is 71.5, again, according to the drawing, right here, 71.5 to kind of define the edge of this pocket. So we just created some construction lines that'll help us out. We have this curved surface here, we have this 15, and now you can kind of see we're getting a particular shape here. So I'm going to trace over this. So I'm going to click on the line command and make sure my construction is now turned off. So I'll go from here to here, and from there to here. However, I can't use the line command to do this. So I'm going to show you a neat little trick here in just a second. I'm going to continue doing that exact same thing. So I'm going to trace from there to there and from there to there. Okay, so what about this little segment? Because I don't have a valid profile. Well, notice this is one solid circle. It goes all the way around. Under the modify command, there is a command in here called break. And watch what happens when I hover over this segment. It's kind of hard to see, but there's little red X's that are appearing right here in the corner here and up there. So by clicking on this segment, I just broke that segment out of the full size circle. So let me do that again. I'll come in here and say break. I'm going to click on this segment. It goes to the next boundary, so that's why you see that X there and the X down there. So I'm going to go ahead and break that. Then I can come in and see that that's its own little segment. Well, I don't want it to be construction, I want it to be an object line. Same thing with this guy. I can click on it and say, change it from a construction to an object line. And we now have a valid profile right there. We don't have one here because it's not closed. But I'm going to go ahead and show you a cool trick here. We're going to mirror this because this is basically the same down here. So let's just use the mirror command. I'm just going to draw a box around what I want to mirror. What's my mirror line? This line right here. I'll go ahead and say OK, and we can now see that we have a valid profile there, there, and there. So I kept my sketch pretty simple, and you can kind of see I started with this and then I mirrored this, but look at all of these icons here. Could I have done this a little bit differently? And the answer is yes. I'm going to undo, and instead of doing a mirror, I'm just going to, in fact I could break it. Let's go ahead and break this segment right there. Let's go ahead and convert that to that, and now I'm done. I am not going to mirror or anything like that on my sketch, and notice how much cleaner this looks. I'll go ahead and extrude these guys. I'm going to start to push down so you can kind of see what's going to happen. Instead of typing a distance, I'm going to say go through all. That way I don't have to remember, was it 12, was it 24, was it 13? I don't care. I just want it to go all the way through the object, like so. Okay. Then I'm going to come in and fillet these guys. So I'll say fillet. These are 5 millimeters. So I'm going to fillet just those two edges there. And then watch what happens when I add in these other edges. They start to create that curved pocket there. So I didn't create the fillets in my sketch. Whoops, sorry, in my sketch. I kept them sharp. And then I used the fillet command to do it in 3D. Now, why would I do that? Well, if I want to come back and change the size of these from 5 to 2, it's very fast and easy to do that. I don't have to edit the sketch. It's just right here as a feature. Okay, now instead of mirroring the sketch, could I mirror these pockets? So let's go ahead and create mirror. I do not want to mirror faces because then I'd have to come in and select every single face. That would take a long time. I don't want to mirror the body because this is all one body, so I want to mirror features. And it's asking, which features do you want to mirror? Well, I want to mirror the extrude, and I want to mirror the fillets. So I'm going to mirror both of those features. What's my mirror plane? We'll say that guy. I'll say OK, and I now have those pockets there. So basically I created a quarter of it, and then we mirrored it that way. Now I think you guys are probably cluing in what we're going to do next. We're going to now mirror this to the other side. So create mirror features. Okay, well, what features do I need to select? Well, if I only selected this mirror feature, notice my preview. So this mirror feature is referencing that extrude and fillet. So I need to actually come in here and say, I want to do all three of these. I want to do the extrude, the fillet, and the mirror. We'll mirror that direction. We get a nice preview of what that's going to look like. I'll say OK. And we now have those pockets on both sides. Now, if I go back to my drawing, some of you eagle-eyed people might be like, well, you forgot a pocket, or actually two pockets right here. Now, I did this on purpose because this is exactly how I modeled the part. I got along and then I looked at my drawing, I'm like, oh man, I totally forgot to do those other little pockets down near the fingers. What do I do? And so I'm trying to recreate what would happen, in the real world with all of you designers and hobbyists and engineers and all that kind of stuff. You're going to run into situations like this. I forgot to do something, or I should have done it, 20 steps ago, etc. So let's take a look at what we're going to do to resolve this. So here is my sketch in my timeline, this right here. So I'm going to go ahead and edit that sketch, but now you'll notice we don't see a lot of the 3D stuff going on because that's happened after we created this sketch. That's okay. So I want to start creating these pockets. Again, I'm going to use information from the drawing, so I'm going to offset this line here, oops, that line, minus 16. I'll do the same thing for this line here, minus 16. And then I'm just going to draw a line that kind of touches this line here. It goes horizontal and touches that line there. Now, why do I care about where it's touching? Well, you can see it's actually creating coincident constraints. So no matter what I do with this line, you can see that it's always going to be touching the edge of those two lines there. It's kind of cool. So coincident constraint, horizontal constraint, but you'll notice that the line is blue. It doesn't know where this line needs to be. So according to the drawing, it is 5 millimeters down from this edge. So you can see that right here, 5 millimeters down from that edge. And it turned black. Now, is this a valid sketch? It is. And I could leave it this way. Now, some people are like, well, that looks dumb. I want to trim my lines. But watch what happens when I trim these lines. You'll notice I get constraints and or dimensions were removed during this operation. So sometimes when you go ahead and trim, we lose some information. So this is no longer constrained. So how would I fix that? Well, I could just throw a dimension back on here. You'll notice it remembers it was 16. And I could do the same thing here. I could even reference that guy if I wanted to. And now, again, it's fully constrained. So you have a couple options. Don't trim it, or trim it, and maybe you might have to rebuild a constraint or a dimension. Okay. So let's go ahead and finish our sketch here. Now you'll notice it kind of went away, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that sketch back on so you can kind of see it there. Now here's the deal. This also has to be over here. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to back up one step in my timeline. So I'm going to go back one step. So I'm before I did the mirror to the other side. Okay? Kind of went back in time a little bit. I'll go ahead and do this extrude. How far? We'll say all, so it goes all the way through. That looks good. I'm going to turn off the sketch so it's a little bit easier to see. Let's fillet these edges. So I'm basically kind of working on this part of the design back in time before we did the mirror. So hopefully you kind of see what's gonna happen here. So I'm going to do radius of 4 for that edge, a radius of 4 for that edge, but it's a radius of 6 for this edge right here. Well, they're all kind of related, so I'm going to come in and add a selection set. So I'm going to click on this little plus, and I'll just go ahead and click on that vertical line and make it 6. And now you can see we're going to have one fillet feature in the timeline, but it's going to do two different sized fillets. In fact, if I say OK, there's my fillet feature. I really like these selection sets because we're kind of working on the same area right here. So instead of having 3 or 4 different fillet features, I could have one with as many selections and sizes as I want. Okay, so I've now created that little pocket, and let's just take a look at the drawing. And I'm like, you know what? There's a rectangular pocket in here also that's on the other side. Man, I should have totally done this before I mirrored those pockets, these through pockets. Well, that's okay. Let's come in here and create the pocket. So let's go ahead and, in this case, I'm going to create a new sketch just to kind of simplify things. I could go back and edit this sketch here, but I've got a lot of stuff going on over here. I don't really see the 3D representation of it. So this is what I was talking about earlier, where sometimes I'll have maybe 2 or 3 sketches. Now you saw that we went back and edited this sketch. We added some extra stuff to it. But here I'm just going to create another sketch. And now I have a nice clean representation. I'll go ahead and project the body, because I want to grab information from the body. And I'm just going to draw or mock up basically a quick little rectangle like that. I don't care about the size or anything yet. We're going to come in and dimension these. So again, according to the drawing, it's 4 millimeters from the top, it's 24 millimeters from the edge, 4 millimeters, etc. So now I do care about the size. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll say we know that this is going to be 24. This is going to be 4 here. And you can see how as we start to do this, it's starting to constrain the sketch for us. Oops, let me make sure I'm in my dimension. From there to there. I want that to be, sorry guys, a vertical dimension. 4. Okay, and then the last dimension here is 4 right here. So basically it's 4 all the way around. So I will throw a dimension from this edge to this edge. And I should have and could have, clicked on an existing dimension like so to reference that. In fact, let's go ahead and do that down here. I'll throw a dimension from here to here, and let's just reference that one. And that way, if we decide to, change the size of this and make it 6, everything's going to update around. Again, little tip there, instead of having to type in, 6, 6, and 6 to change that, I only have to change one of them. Okay. Finish. Now, this is a little bit confusing. Hopefully I can explain this. This is a section view that's cutting through the model. And we can see that there's basically a web. And it's this face you see right here. And it is 4 millimeters thick. So while the rest of this model is pretty thick, right here it's only 4 millimeters thick. Now I drew my sketch on the top face, and you'll notice I don't have a dimension that tells you from this outside edge to here what that is. We have no idea what it is, and the drawing doesn't tell us. So how would we solve this? I like to throw these little curveballs in here. So let me check the questions really quick before I dive into here. Okay, so Al asked, is there a way to print a sketch? There is. So if you come into here, you can right mouse click, and you can see you could save this as a DXF. So you could bring that up into a PDF drawing or whatever. There's lots of viewers out there for DXF. Or if I just come in here and say File, Share. Nope, I guess there is not. No, I thought there was. There's 3D print, but usually under share, like I can do capture image. So for example, let's just do this. File, capture image. It'll let you capture this image, and then you could print that. So yeah, that's a good question. Okay, let me turn my body back on. Okay, another question from y'all, are some constraints more expensive to compute? Like would using horizontal be, take more performance than using like symmetry? So this is a really good question. So thank you for asking that, Al. I don't know if one is heavier than the other, but I personally do not use symmetry that much. One, because it really complicates and clutters my sketch. Yes, I know you can turn off your, what's being displayed and all this kind of stuff, but I like to keep my sketches simple, and I would use a 3D mirror versus using like a symmetry in my sketch. So I don't know how to really answer that question. Like if I referenced this 4 with a bunch of different dimensions, I don't think that's any heavier than just saying this is 4, this is 4, this is 4, etc. I just think this is faster and smoother to make changes down the road. So yeah, that's a good question. I do not know the answer to that. So I do know the more complex your sketch gets, the longer it takes to calculate. And that's one of the reasons I like to keep my sketches as simple as possible. So, okay. So let's do this. We're going to extrude this guy. Now, what we're going to do is change the start to not be this profile. So I'm going to change this. Basically what it's saying right now is when we do an extrude, it's going to start at that profile plane where we drew this profile. Well, I can come in here and say offset, or I can say from an object. So I'm going to say from an object, and let's click this bottom face. Now watch what happens when I start to drag. It is starting, it's using this profile, but it's starting from the bottom of the part, and it's starting to extrude up. Well, I don't want it to start from the bottom. We know that there's a 4 millimeter thickness there, but now notice I have this offset. So I'm going to type in -2, and we can visually see what's happening now. It's starting, and again, you're probably asking why the -2. So it's starting here. This is the positive direction. So I told it to go in the negative direction, 2 millimeters. Now, how far do we need it to cut? Well, we want it to go all the way through. So it's using the profile from the top face, starting at the bottom face, offsetting 2 millimeters, and then extruding all the way through the object. Kind of different, but really powerful. I didn't have to move my sketch to the other face or create another sketch or undo or anything like that. I just used this start option. And you might ask, what's offset? Well, remember my profiles here? I could have said offset, 3 millimeters down and then start to extrude. So that's what that is. Object allowed me to pick a totally different object or a different face. So cool little tip there. Hopefully you guys learned something there. Let's go ahead and fillet this pocket. So I think these are radius 6 according to the drawing. So there's that guy. Now, if I were to come in and add a selection set, I could. But notice that these fillets go away, so I have to manually select all 4 of these edges. And I even have to rotate potentially or whatever. But then I could come in and say, okay, that is a radius of 2, and it'll do all of them in one fillet feature. Okay. Or I could come in here and say, this is a radius of 6. Let's just do those 4 edges. I'll say, okay. There's my fillet feature. Then I can come in and fillet. And because of this tangent chain, it's going to select all of those edges for me. I can say 2, and I get the exact same result, except for the fact that I now have 2 fillet features. Again, totally up to you. Is one better than the other? I don't know. I mean, I think the simpler your timeline is, the faster it'll calculate, kind of going back to Eyal's question. So I would probably do a selection set. But knowing that, I'm going to have to probably manually select some edges. So if this was a very complex model, I'd probably do 2 or 3 fillet features and let the chain command really help me out. But on something as simple as a rectangle, I'm probably going to do it with just 1 fillet feature. So I'd come back into here, add in that, and I just have to select those 4 edges. Now, do I have to select those 4 edges? Check this out. Okay, so there's my result. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. Instead of the 4 edges, I'm going to do a selection set. I'm going to click this face. And I'm going to say 2 millimeters. And notice the result that I got. By clicking the face, it selected those 4 edges of that face automatically. And not a lot of people know that you can do this. So let me back up. Selection set, I was manually clicking all 4 of these edges. Okay? But instead, I can just click on that face, tell it I want that to be a 2 millimeter, and it's going to select all those edges. So if you liked that, if you didn't know about that tip, make sure you give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you didn't like that tip. we take all feedback. Okay, so we're still back in time. Remember, I already mirrored all this stuff over here, but we're still working on this. I'm going to look at my drawing really quick. I can see that there's some holes that go through this pocket. I'm going to go ahead and do those. It looks like they are 5 diameter through holes. So I'm going to click on this face and use the hole command. I really like the hole command instead of using like a sketch and a profile or whatever, it gives me a nice preview. Obviously way too big, so the first thing I'm going to do is change my diameter to 5. Okay, that's looking a little bit better. Now where does it need to go? Well, you'll notice there are no dimensions to these circles. However, there are center lines, so we know that they're centered or concentric with the arcs or the other fillets. So I'm going to start to drag this little blue dot, and you can see 2 white dots that kind of appeared. And that is the center of all of these edges, these fillets here. So I'm just going to get near that dot, boom, and it drops right onto it. And it's perfectly where it needs to be. I don't need it to be that long, so I'm going to just say go through all. It figures out what it needs to do. Diameter 5 looks good. I'll say OK. I'll repeat my last command, hopefully. Maybe not. Oh yeah, because I pre-selected. So I'll just do the whole command. I'll click there. It remembers my 5. I'm just going to start to drag, drop it right there. It snaps right to it. And we'll say go through all. And there we go. Those 2 holes are exactly where they need to be. And I didn't have to create a sketch or anything. And there are features in the timeline, so I can go back and edit those very easily. Okay, now I pretty much have everything I need, except for these holes here. We're going to come back to those later, but I have this pocket, I've got this pocket. Okay, so let's advance forward in time. And just these pockets mirrored over. Nothing else did. Well, why not? Well, because when we created this mirror, we only told it to select certain things out of our timeline. So I'm going to edit this mirror feature. And you can see right here, features, 3 selected. We only mirrored the extrude, the fillet, and the mirror. Well, I can come in and say, well, now I want to grab the this extrude here, that fillet there, so now it's going to mirror that pocket. You can see the preview. But I also want to do maybe that pocket, the fillet, and the 2 holes. And notice the preview. I'll go ahead and say OK, and just like that, we didn't have to create multiple mirror features. We were able to kind of go back in time and put all of these where we wanted them, and then add them to the existing mirror feature. I think that's pretty cool that you can do that. Okay, let me look at questions really quick, see if there's any new ones. Okay, it doesn't look like it, so okay, so now obviously I want to create these counterbored holes. We can see it's a diameter 10, diameter of 14, and I think I left out, I did, the depth of the counterbore. I apologize, guys. We'll make it up. So I'm going to use the hole command. And just like before, if I drag on this face, we can see there is a point at the center of this curve. So I'm just going to snap right there. We will build this the right way. So I'm going to say counterbore. I like to do the larger diameter first. Now I'm probably going to get an error. Yeah, well, maybe not. Okay, it's smart enough. The counterbore diameter is going to be 14, and then the counterbore depth is going to be 6. Okay, now I want it to go all the way through. So there is a depth there, so I want to basically go all the way through, and you can see we get that result there. Say OK, and there's our counterbored hole. And I'll do the exact same thing over here. It's going to remember all of my last settings. So all I have to do is drag it into place. Now I could have done this before the mirror feature, etc., etc. I could have, but I didn't want to beat a dead horse doing things over and over again. So it's totally, again, up to you. If you wanted to do that before the mirror and then mirror that whole feature, it would have appeared there. I feel more comfortable knowing that that's going exactly at the center of that curve. Okay, so pretty quickly we've created this whole part. Now all that's left is to create this curved surface. And you'll notice I just did a flat extrude. I didn't do anything to make this a curved surface. I'm going to basically create a curve according to these dimensions here and use that to split the body. And that's how I came about doing this. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new sketch. And let's just do it on this front plane. We'll project the whole body. We'll say OK. You can see it projected that whole body. And then I want to create a line, a construction line. And I'm just going to click somewhere like up here, for example, and maybe over here, making sure that that's horizontal. And the reason I'm doing that is because we can see here that the overall thickness of this curve is 12. So I'm going to dimension that to be 6 millimeters up, because we're basically slicing this in half. So half of 12 is 6. So let's go ahead and throw a dimension on here. From here to there, let's just make that 6. I could even have measured this line and said this distance has to be half of what that measurement is. That way, if we were to ever change the thickness of the part, again, think about all the functionality you can do here. Okay, so now I'm going to do an arc. And now let's do a center point. No, let's do a 3-point arc. So I'm going to start at this point here. I'm going to catch to there. Then I'm going to catch to this point here. And I usually move to kind of see what's going on. I can see, uh-oh, I'm in construction. So let's go ahead and turn that guy off. And then you can see I can snap right there. So I'm going to go ahead and click. But this line is still blue. Well, why is that? Well, if I grab on it, I can see that I can still move it. So this is one of those examples where I like to over-exaggerate or under-exaggerate and physically see that my constraint is actually working. So now you can see I drag this curve down a little bit. Maybe I'll drag it up a little bit like so. Okay. So now I need to constrain this. So let's do the midpoint of this arc is at the midpoint of this line. And now we can see that that arc is no longer blue. It's fully constrained. So again, I always kind of like test and try to make sure things are working the way I expect. That looks good. Then we're going to use just this line. I don't have to create a surface or anything like that. I'll come in here and say split the body. What's the body to split? In fact, I'm going to expand this open. That's the body to split. What's my splitting tool? I'm just going to make sure I click on that line, that arc. And we can see that it's going to take that arc and basically create a surface and use that to split. That's kind of what's happening in the background. You'll notice I have extend turned on. That just, gives us a little bit extra border all the way around instead of just to the edge of the line. I usually have that turned on. Watch what happens to my bodies folder when I say OK. We now have 2 separate bodies. Now we don't need body 2, so we're going to go ahead and just remove that. Not delete, but remove. We don't need it. We're going to remove it from our design, basically. If I were to say delete, there's things that are referencing that, and it could get kind of confusing. So I always use remove, and notice we now have one body. If we look at it from the front, it's nice and curved. And we could go back and change that curve just by editing that arc if we wanted to. And we've basically created everything. All I need to do now is mirror this whole body. So instead of features this time, I am going to say let's mirror the body, that guy. What's my mirror plane? I'll click on that face there. Kind of gives me a little bit of a preview, and I want them to join. And we now have the pockets on both sides. However, we also have the counterbore on both sides, which I really don't want the counterbore on this side. So I'm just going to come in and select these four faces and say delete. And you can see that it's now a hole. The counterbore still exists on the top, but we basically just deleted that counterbore feature just by selecting those four faces. Okay. There's a chamfer that goes all the way around, so I'm going to click on this one edge and say chamfer. It's a 1 millimeter chamfer, and again, because of tangent chain, it went all the way around my model. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and select both of those edges, and we're going to chamfer both of those edges all the way around. Okay, one last thing here. Actually, a couple things. We might run a little bit over. I apologize. There is some screw holes here, and we can see that they're 100 millimeters apart. Okay. So I like to use the hole command, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a sketch, and I'm just going to throw a couple points on here. So I'm going to use the point command. I'll just do one there and one there, for example. Okay. Let's go ahead and project the body. We might need to use that. Then I'm going to horizontally constrain these guys. So I'm going to say I want those two to be horizontal with each other. I also want them to be horizontal with the origin. And we know that they need to be 100 millimeters apart. So I'll come in here and type in 100. But now how do I get them to center? Well, just like I showed before, I could throw a dimension here, and it says it's 31. Well, I'm going to click on that guy and divide it by 2. And just like that, we now have these points that are exactly where they need to be. I can use the hole command, and here is a neat option. Add a point, a single hole, or from sketch. So I'm going to click on this from sketch. I'll click on one of these points, and it'll give me a quick preview of what that's going to look like. Well, obviously, we don't want that, so I'm going to change it to a countersunk hole. We want it to be a simple hole, and the depth is going to be 10. The diameter, the countersink diameter is going to be 5.5. Again, according to the drawing, I'm just grabbing this from, and the hole diameter is going to be 5.2. So it's created that little countersink. We've got that drill point. We got it the right depth, and then I can just come over here and click that point right there. By doing this from sketch, I could just keep clicking as many points as I wanted to. I could even do that center point if I wanted to. We'll say OK. Okay, and I could come in here and say, obviously, we want that to be tapped or whatever. So now they're tapped holes. The last thing I'm going to do here is this little groove that cuts through these fingers. So I'm probably going to create a new sketch for this, obviously, and let's do it on like this side plane. I can kind of rotate a little bit. Project. And again, I'm going to project the whole body, and you'll see that it just basically grabs the whole outside shape of it that I can reference instead of just a single face or whatever if I had done selected entities. I'm going to create a slot, and let's just do a center point slot because I want to control the height of my slot. So I'm just going to get near this center point here, move straight up, and I'm just going to go ahead and click somewhere, I don't care where. The diameter is 8, and I've created this slot, but you'll notice that that arc and that arc are blue. That's because it doesn't know how tall that slot is supposed to be. So we'll come in here and throw a dimension from that edge to that point. It needs to be, I think, 44 if I remember correctly from the drawing. And you can see that that grew and it's fully constrained. I'll finish my sketch. And let's do a symmetric extrude. So I'm going to say extrude, start to drag. We can kind of visually see what that's going to look like. Let's go symmetric, and we're going to obviously go all the way through, and we can see it slices all the way through, and we are done with our design. So I would go ahead and save that. So not an overly complex timeline. Probably about 15 steps, 15 features or whatever. But the fact that it's got, the curved shape, we used the mirror command. We basically built a quarter of it, mirrored that, and then we mirrored the whole body to get that other side. So let me check the questions really quick. I know we're over. I don't see any more. So hopefully you all learned some new tips and tricks with that. Like I mentioned before, the outline and the drawing are in the description of the video. And want to thank everybody for attending. And join us next week where I think Angela is going to take this part and show how you would put toolpaths on it to manufacture it. With that, have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.